Okay, so hello and welcome to 5 Minute Sociology with me, Adam Melvin. Essentially these videos are supposed to be revision materials and designed so you can recap theories really. So I'm going to recap theories in a 5 minute window. Right, so today's theory we're going to look at is Marxism. Okay, so Marxism, essentially, to understand Marxism, we have to really understand capitalism. Okay, so capitalism is a political and economic system where the means of production, and we'll come back to what the means of production means in a minute, where the means of production are owned by private business owners, okay? So the majority of the wealth of a capitalist society is owned by private individuals. Products are bought and sold, and the main point of the business owners is to make profit, okay? And those people that work within the capitalist system, unless they own the businesses or run the businesses, the only thing they tend to have to sell is their wage labour. So we are able to sell our time and skills in order to work for someone else, so that company can make profit. Now, the majority of Western societies are capitalist. So in the Isle of Man here and in the United Kingdom, we live within a capitalist system. Now, Marx, getting into Marxism, so Marx was writing in the 1800s, a very different capitalist society, but still a capitalist society. So he was talking about essentially the problems with capitalism. So really, as I said earlier, if you think about Marxism as a critique of capitalism, that's the best way to think of it. Okay, so we've briefly talked about capitalism, let's talk about Marxism. Okay, so when we think about Marxism, a good way, if you're trying to remember kind of a summary of the theory, is to think of the 3 C's, okay? So that is class, capitalism and conflict, okay? So we've dealt with capitalism, so it's a critique of capitalism. Conflict, essentially the theories we're going to look at over the next few sessions will generally fit into either a conflict or a consensus theory, okay? So Marxism is conflict, which means that the groups that we're talking about involved are actually in conflict with one another, okay? So in the Marxist system, we'll talk about this in a minute, but they are essentially, the classes involved are kind of working against each other. In other theories that we'll look at, such as functionalism, they're a consensus theory. So a consensus theory means that the groups that we're talking about in the theory are actually working more in harmony, okay? So capitalism, it's a critique of capitalism. Conflict, it's a conflict theory. And class, now this is the really important bit because this is kind of the bones of the theory. Class. So Marx didn't, traditionally we see class as the kind of traditional upper class, middle class, lower class, and possibly underclass as well. But Marx suggested, within his sort of Marxist theory, that there was 2 class systems. So the bourgeoisie are the upper class, and these people own the factories, own the, manage the companies, and they own the means of production. So if you remember, I mentioned that earlier. The means of production are the raw materials, the machinery, the factories needed to produce products, okay? Now, the other class that's involved in Marxism is the proletariat, okay? So the proletariat are the workers. So Marx just basically suggested there was 2 classes: bourgeoisie, which are the sort of the rich landowners, the factory owners, and the proletariat, which are the everyday workers. And as I mentioned earlier, the workers are only really have their wage labour to sell, so they only really have their time and their work to sell, okay? Now, that is the kind of really the bones of Marxism. Marx thought that this was not a good system, and that eventually the proletariat would rise up and overthrow the bourgeoisie. And he famously, well, it's been paraphrased many times, but he famously said, "Workers of the world, unite! You have nothing to lose but your chains." So once the workers realised that they don't have anything to lose, if there's more of them than there are the bourgeoisie, then they would overthrow. Okay. So, just to quickly summarise, Marxism. It's a conflict theory, meaning that the two groups are in conflict with each other. It's based on a critique of capitalism. So Marx saw the capitalist system as unfair, and it's essentially critiquing that system. So we need to know a bit about capitalism in order to understand that. And class, and that is the main point really, the class. So the two classes, bourgeoisie, proletariat, the rich landowners, the workers, these were at conflict with each other. And essentially that is a very quick summary of Marxism.